but then the Highlander Priest for Bozzdton and the Hunter for AyRoK. And honestly, just looking at it, Saul, for other reasons than I love Hunter, I would prefer to be AyRoK in this scenario.
Yeah, I do. I almost feel like Highlander Priest is a little bit of a relic at this point. We've seen APAC getting away from Priest almost entirely. I think only 2 players bought Priest at all, and one of them is Tyler, who is kind of self-confessed not part of the APAC metagame. You know, he preps with European and Americas GMs, so his lists quite often reflect that. And even over here, we're starting to see more and more 2 of Priest and less Highlander Priest. So interested in the performance of the players who have maintained their faith in Highlander Priest up until this point. Worth noting, as you can see, although Bozzdton has a very poor overall game score win record, after making it into Division B, he has got off to a positive start. So he is at 2-1 here, only having played 3 matches, whereas some of his rivals in the division have played 4 already, AyRoK being one of them, at a 1-3 record overall. So this is a more vital win for AyRoK than it is for Bozzdton, but still, if you're Bozzdton, you do not want to lose to the players at the bottom of the league, because those losses almost count double, because they're the players that are trying to scrap back up and catch up to you. So if Bozzdton ends up with a 2-4, 2-5 kind of record towards the end of the season, and AyRoK has caught up and tied that, Bozzdton will finish lower than AyRoK on tiebreakers potentially, because AyRoK picked up the win in this series.
Right, and already into it there, AyRoK Kunis Hunter first has a, I would argue, 50% good hand, 50% pretty bad hand, because Volpatingers aren't really cards you want to draw naturally, especially in the early game. Like, all your other 1-drops are just better. And then it's the same can be said for Voracious Reader as well. I think that's definitely a card you want to see going into, say, turns 5 and 6, kind of, maybe even 7 sort of area, as opposed to having your opening hand, because it does get a little bit tricky to dump your hand that early. So, not the best start here for AyRoK.
Oh, how times have changed, Raven. Remember when we used to just have Alley Cat and we just play Alley Cat on 1? Like, Alley Cat on 1. This is the nuts. Now it's like Alley Cat on 1. No, throw that back in my deck. I want to play a 1-mana 2/3/3s. That's the only acceptable 1-drop.
Yeah. If only they could bring card draw back as well, then everything would be great in the world. But this is going to be a tough one. Personally, I think Hunter has a really good matchup versus Mage, because Mage just doesn't really have a way to stop the damage, and it normally comes sort of thick and fast. But this is one of those hands that Mage can beat.
Yeah, I'm starting to end up on an island alone when it comes to the casters here, in that I think this matchup isn't as bad as everyone's saying it is. They don't have any, like, Mage doesn't have any way to stop the damage, but they do have a lot of ways to just win board really, really early. And then you can kind of reverse the dynamic, which is, well, how does Hunter stop the Mage snowballing into Raz or into Giants or into Conjurer's Calling? Like, I think this matchup is very, very racy, and the Mage needs to have an extremely fast hand at the start of the game to force Hunter off board very, very quickly.
Right.
But you're seeing, like, from the Mage side, this kind of is that kind of hand, right? Bozzdton can just piece that together and potentially just win board right now, and then maybe flip the dynamic on AyRoK to have to do something different.
Yeah, and I think this is going to be very important here as to how Bozzdton goes about this turn. Okay. I was wondering whether that was the turn to just play and actually drop the Sorcerer's Apprentice and go that little bit faster. Because this 5-4 could cause some issues here. It did make a pretty bad trade, I think, for AyRoK. I think he would have loved to leave that 1 health minion alive for the Volpatinger to trade into this turn.
Yeah, I actually do like the 3 minions play there from Bozzdton, because it creates the most difficult scenarios for AyRoK on this turn. Obviously, Bozzdton's dealing with an unknown hand, but if we just deal specifically with a range of options that AyRoK does have, which I think is fairly representative of a fairly average Hunter hand at this point, you can see, like, Phase Stalker Hero Power, the fact there's just that 1 extra minion in play, it's able to pick apart most of the secrets that would come down in the scenario. Adorable Infestation, again, the fact there's just an extra minion there means that Bozzdton does actually get to consolidate some board presence here. And just Dragonbane on curve, kind of same deal, right? Like, it's just already contested on board and makes it feel a lot less appealing.
Right. Really interesting approach here, actually. Even though it looked kind of weird, I think I was still staring at just play the Phase Stalker Hero Power at that point to get a secret live.
Oh!
Arcane Explosion. Well, this is just fine, right? Even if this evocation completely whiffs, which it just can't with this many cards, like
Just
it was
objectively impossible.
Yeah, it was still a good turn. If this was all flame strikes, it was still a good turn for Bozzzton. Oh, jeez.
Ice Barrier, Ray of Frosts, and Arcane Explosion until everything's dead. Do you want to fit an Icicle in there as well? Like, is the Ice Barrier important when you're at 30? I'd argue maybe yes.
With no card draw, I would argue yes. I think that's 100%, because Bozzzton is going to just have no cards at the end of this turn. Okay, roughly no cards. So I do actually think the Ice Barrier is important, yeah.
Okay, he's going to hold the Explosion and just use the Rays to kill stuff instead to get the Ice Barrier. It seems fine, sure. Okay with this. And this is the dynamic I was talking about, right? Like, board 1, initiative flip. So the emphasis is now on AyRoK to say, well, I have board now. Next turn I'm playing Jandis. I'm at 38.
Mm-hmm.
You have to deal with me. I don't have to deal with you.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, Mage has this capability versus pretty much any deck, right? If you're gonna go Sorcerer's Apprentice Evocation into some good stuff, then that seems pretty good. And AyRoK did have double Volpatinger in his opening hand, which is kind of rough. So
yeah.
There are definitely draws that make this matchup hard, but I think that's more just a nod at how powerful Mage can be, regardless of opponent, than anything else.
Or one Thief is perfection here as well.
Is there not an argument to like freeze the 1/1?
To protect your illusion, you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, you know, is it worth you having an extra 1/2 on board to then lose your illusion, right?
Over to you, Raven.
Now, which one do you... No, I'm not even going to bother. I think this is 100% worth the Ray of Frost here, though, right?
I mean, you're protecting a 4/2.
That's a lot of damage.
Important? It is a lot of damage.
Add up those attack values for me, Sol. That is like half of AyRoK's health.
Yep, very close. Yeah, sure. Shut your eyes and pick one. These are all incredibly good.
But which one is the coolest? Yeah, I agree. The Deep Freeze is the coolest. This is the plan. Dragonbane, the Wax to Dread, and then just Dragonbane all the way home.
Yeah, I'm just confused by where the attacks went. I guess if you're not 100% confident which one the illusion is, that's fine. But I feel like you can be pretty confident where that illusion was, but no, fine.
Maybe that's what Bozzzton wants you to think.
Yeah. No one wants to lose the game to the bait, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because that's just embarrassing at that point. Oh. Is it just pack 6? Oh, is there one freezing still left? Just looks like a pretty reasonable deep freeze here for me from Bozzzton. Just start stacking up even more damage. The freeze is going to be a problem for this bow, just never to be swung again in this game. I don't think there's too great a fear of the pressure plate from AyRoK.
No, I agree. I think you just do it and the game ends.
Yep. Just doesn't matter. Pressure plate can only kill one elemental, max. So you still, at worst, end up with another one.
It's a little bit awkward just in terms of the Phase Stalker on board, because you really don't want to sink 7 into it, but you also don't want it to be alive. Like, you're winning the game here, and... Yeah, go ahead.
It doesn't matter if it's
I
alive,
agree.
right? Yeah, okay, good. I was going to say,
I agree
think
it
you just
doesn't
ignore
matter that it's alive, but I also don't think it matters if you cast Deep Freeze or not this turn. You know, like, the game's just won.
Okay, yeah. Do something and deal damage. Is that
Exactly.
we agree on that one?
Yeah.
Tall Guide, not a bad minion, but not quite enough to save the day here. Always a rough pickup when you're on 8 mana and you just draw a Tall Guide as your whole hand. Not really the time you'd save mana. It does mean Bozzzton going to start off this series in the right way for him, getting a victory over that Hunter. And really tough matchup there, because I think for AyRoK, that is, at least for me, one you go into feeling pretty confident. But I think a bit of a rough opening draw for him. Even arguably with the Felmore, not the best card versus Mage, because it's more susceptible to like, oh, it's one big minion, freeze once, and then it just takes so much longer to have an impact. Bit of a rough opening hand, and then obviously I do think Bozzzton did just do that early game pretty well with the help of the evocation, of course, as well.
Yeah, and I think, you know, forget about my opinion. Certainly, if you're bringing Face Hunter to the tournament over multiple weeks, I'm pretty sure that's a matchup that you as the player think is in your pocket, right? Because it's one of the big reasons, one of the big arguments why you would bring that deck. So certainly, from AyRoK's perspective, that's a hugely disappointing loss to take. And I know he has felt up against it a little bit. You know, he's felt like, obviously, as an aggro player, it can be sometimes a shock to the system when you don't replicate your results from like testing or from ladder when you come into tournament, and it just doesn't quite replicate. And we really did have a streak where, for multiple years, honestly, where aggro just felt like the dominant strategy. That, you know, all these people had all these different ideas of what the best lineup was. It was just quad aggro. It always was. We figured that out way too late in metagames. Just doesn't really seem to be the case anymore. Like, you know, real high quality aggro decks just don't seem to exist. And unfortunately, AyRoK it seems to be on the receiving end of that dynamic right now.
Yeah, I think the biggest deal right now is the more value-based, slightly slower decks have access to small minions that are powerful, whereas maybe historically that was not the case. So like one makers are good value cards that can fight for the board early, for example.
And mana cheat on top of that as well, right?
Yeah,
because
true.
When you're playing aggro and every other deck cheats 5, 10, 15 mana in a turn against you, like, how do you actually keep up with that when your whole idea is going faster than they do?
Yeah, the key point being, let's give Hunter mana cheat for next expansion, please, Blizzard. But for now, we are going to go to a break while we give the players just a minute to get ready for their next game. Don't go anywhere, and we'll be back with some more Hearthstone Grandmasters. Welcome back, everyone. We are ready to continue our second match of the day, and it is AyRoK versus Bozzzton. AyRoK going to be going once again with that Face Hunter Sottle, and I do feel like, I think it was the same at least towards the end of the Asia Pacific broadcast where a Face Hunter was struggling to get some wins. So I definitely think the deck looks worse than it is, or at least it has been doing today, but I do still have a lot of faith in this deck.
Sorry, I was muted. The matchup against Mage is fine at worst for Hunter. You know, opinions vary, but most people feel like that is a favored matchup for the Hunter. Then obviously the Druid matchup is arguably the biggest reason why you bring it, right? So you'd expect that in most series you have at least two favorable matchups on your side, since Mage and Druid of some variety are so common in Europe. You know, we're looking at 60% Mage and 30% each of the two major Druid variations, which means you're running into 1.5 to 2 of those on most series that you play. So I honestly think Face Hunter is a reasonable bring, and it's been a deck that's been on the fringes in Europe, but it's you know, a little bit underperformed outside of the hands of Ball Control, really, who's been the only player to put in significant work with it.
Well, here we go. It's going to be going up against Bozzzton's Priest. And this is one of the players who's bringing Highlander Priest, hence where we see Breath of the Infinite in there in his opening hand as well. So a little bit weaker, I would say, as just less consistent options in the early game. And just a quick glance at the list, although there is Penance and although there's Swampoos, there is no Pyromancer, which for me is one of the key cards in the matchup.
Yeah, and even if there were, because of the nature of Bozzzton's build, being the Highlander Priest, it would mean that he'd only have access to a single copy of it. But generally, you don't see the Pyromancer in the Highlander Priest, because there isn't that consistent glut of cheap spells to go along with it most of the time. But it does mean that it does have access to some of the cards that you just straight up don't play in the 2-of list, like Breath of the Infinite. Like Penance, for example, just some of these early game key tools that you don't actually have access to when you run the 2-of Priest, and you are much more minion focused overall.
Right, this is going to be very, very interesting of an opening play here from Bozzzton. I'm excited to see what he does with Zephyrus, because even if he would want to like coin it out this turn, that would be interesting. And I don't know, especially now seeing it into a Phase Stalker, this is actually looking really tough for Bozzzton already. Although Zephyrus normally looks great, everything else looks horrible right now.
Yeah, I think Bozzzton just has to coin Zephyrus Holy Smite here, contest board. He can curve into Vulpera Scoundrel the turn after that, and
Job done.
Are you okay, Sol? I've lost you. Oh, I do now. Okay, I've got you back. You did just maybe, I don't know if that was my end or your end, but it sounded like you were full robot for me for a second there.
Oh, okay.
So I could not hear a word. Apologies. What were you saying about Vulpera?
Yeah, so
for my sake, at least.
with the Holy Smite, he's at least has Vulpera on the following turn, and then he's going to need Vulpera and Draconic Studies to just make something happen for like turns 4 and 5, because the rest of his hand is so ugly right now.
No, AyRoK does have an option to just go bow equip, and then he knows that at least one of the potential weapon destructions is gone in the form of that Zephyrus, so he knows it's a little bit safer. At least with just, I believe, just the one ooze left in the deck that can break it. Choose to go wider instead. How do you like this? This just looks like 1 mana not spent in my eyes, Sol.
It is potentially 1 mana unspent, yeah, but I think you do need to focus on minion damage first, right? Like, you can't just straight up count to 30, specifically because you're in the Priest matchup and they have a lot of tools to mitigate that. So I do value sticking a board first and foremost. I think it does make sense.
Here though, again, slightly off-curve plays for AyRoK. That should sort itself out pretty quickly, as it often does in Hunter anyway. But still has worked out with this 3-2 and the double Vorpating is still on board, but there's Ray's dead. Which means he's going to get Zephyrus and Volpera back.
Mm-hmm. Huge deal.
He could heal and just like... He could either heal backstab or just use an ooze from Zephyrus to break the weapon. Also seems okay.
Yeah, it's still just that little step short of everything that he needs to get done, because it's either deal with the weapon or deal with the board, and he really wants to deal with both right now because so much damage is being represented on both sides.
And he did just deal 3 damage to himself, of course, as well,
exactly.
which is unfun. What if it's like just Disciple, Renew, Zephyrus, Backstab? So then he's got a bit of a board, he's negated some of the self-damage, and he has cleared off the most threatening minion on board. I don't know. Tough.
It is tough. It's hard here when you're... Wow, no ooze. It's hard here when you're influenced by the... we can see the pressure plate in hand as well, right? So we know that the weapon is a huge threat. Whereas from Bozzzton's perspective, he could be justified in thinking, well, I don't necessarily need to deal with the weapon unless he starts drawing secrets, because I've already dealt with a Phase Stalker this game already.
And sometimes Zephyrus just doesn't give you the choice regardless, right? Like, once you play the Zephyrus with no ooze on offer, couldn't kill the weapon if he wanted to anyway.
Yeah. Arcane Explosion to kill 2 1/1s over dealing with a weapon. Interesting. I guess in that scenario, Zephyrus just sees a 3-1 weapon, right? Like, it doesn't know the Face Hunter matchup, that's infinite damage over time with secrets if it doesn't get removed. Maybe if he'd gone down to 1, you'd actually have more opportunity to get Bloodsail Corsair there. Kind of interesting.
Yeah, maybe. This is another tough turn, honestly. Like, oh. Quickly. I think he does want to play 2 cards in some respect here, because he needs his Voracious Reader to start putting the work in. But if the 2 cards are the secret, then he probably doesn't want to swing the weapon, which means he has to trade the Volpatingers into the Zephyrus now? Oh, doesn't want to protect the Reader. Well, okay. Have to.
Ooh.
Oh, was that...
It was, at the very least, a significant amount of indecision at the end of that turn from AyRoK. Certainly did not know whether he wanted to deal with the Zephyrus, whether he wanted to trade minions, whether he wanted to blow up the weapon. He was not committed to a line by the end of the turn, whether he wanted to get that attack through or not.
And honestly, most turns of this game from AyRoK's side, I felt uncomfortable, right? Like, none of the turns felt that good, did they, from AyRoK? And I'm not even, like, overly blaming AyRoK. I'm just saying the way his hand played out and everything he had, nothing felt quite good enough. This might be the point in the game now that Bozzzton's starting to get to, one, is like mid-game threats and removal and enough mana to play them. Might actually start to see it pay off now, where AyRoK might have just not done enough here.
Holy Ripple picked up here for Bozzzton, but he's still dealing with the threat of the secret. But I think, yeah, if he just makes the attack first and just rips the Holy Ripple this turn, I think dealing with Pressure Plate might be okay.
I was also just wondering, what if he just doesn't? What if he just heals instead, right? He leaves a 1-1, but it doesn't give the bow another charge, right?
Yeah, I agree. But I think the secrets are going to have to get dealt with, because he has like so many powerful plays over the next few turns that involve spells, right? Like Penance Brittlebone next turn is like so insane, and then he has Wretched Tutor for Spellburst as well. That like, it feels like just dealing with the secret is worthwhile. So
we see here AyRoK going for the pretty straightforward play of just the Dragon Bane. The only slight worry is with Phase Stalker in hand, there's always a fear that the longer you don't play it in hero power, the more chance you have of just drawing a secret naturally, which feels pretty bad.
Alright.
Dragonbane gonna get cleaned up pretty nicely with this brittle bone turn you were talking about.
Yeah, and since there was only one minion in play, he got to preserve the penance now, potentially to go along with that Wretched Tutor, which could be a big deal. AyRoK does now drop the Phase Stalker, and this time Pack Tactics is what he comes out with.
And I think with 2 charges on this bow and knowing there's an ooze in the deck, I don't think there's a need to re-equip, is there?
It's a good question. Most expensive card in his deck will be Polkelt at this point, which would cause him to miss a hero power if he wants to play it that turn. I think he'd probably still have to take the risk. Oh!
even Bozzzton's like, oh, okay. This one's gonna hurt. Oh.
Yeah. Oh. Bozzzton suddenly feeling like he needs a shower after that one. Choosing to deal with the board, knows he has penance to clear this up anyway. Crimson Hothead.
This is just going to be the backbreaker here. Yep. There we go.
Yep.
Yep. Oh.
If power what you seek.
Oh, it was Polkelt off the top. Wow,
the
that's a pretty good
Polkelt.
deal, actually.
Which means with 2 bows gone and the Dragonbane gone, it's actually still not having that big of an impact. He's going to draw 1 kill command and then he's going to be into his secrets and 2 drops on the draws after that. So he just really needs to end the game with this double kill command. He's going to run out of steam incredibly quickly.
It's a pretty big deal. It's a bit late to the party. Scavenger's ingenuity right now, isn't it?
Yeah,
like,
good point.
Oh, it doesn't even have like the hope at a power play at that.
Yeah. Oh. Bozzzton taking your time as you absolutely should here after Polkelt comes down, just assessing which cards he's seen, which cards are left remaining, what the next draw is.
Life and hope
Yep.
of your fighting.
Biggest deal right now is because of because of what he's seen. The biggest question will be: do not die to double kill command beast hero power. Like that's like priority 1. Anything else from that, because he's already seen Dragonbane, the bows are gone, as you mentioned. There is literally nothing else to really be afraid of apart from the double kill command beast turn. And and you can see why, right? 15 health, double kill command hero power with the beast gets him to 12. How does he deal with the rest? He just doesn't.
He doesn't. His last remaining straight-up burst damage is Demon Companion, which is now all the way down at the bottom of his deck. Nothing else in his deck deals damage immediately. Imprisoned Felmore off the top next turn, and then that goes face. Maybe he has a chance, but Bozzzton has, I think, quite smartly played an 8-8 here to be able to race any kind of those niche situations.
He just has to, right?
Oh, that's such a big deal. That allows Bozzzton to go face this turn now, if he would like to. Because he can play the Wretched Tutor with the 1-maker, play his 1-mana spell, and then still get the 2 heal to his own face, and push all of his damage to face this turn and set up the race, potentially.
Wouldn't you just Cabal 1 instead?
That's fair. Yeah, you could do that instead.
Just steal 1, trade the 1/2 into the other, push 8, I think. Just so you have a taunt. I mean, not that he needs to be really afraid of anything. I guess the thing he's afraid for is just the Felmore, right? But it's like that's just too long. It's just too many turns.
Yeah. Like with the cards remaining in deck, the taunt actually doesn't do anything. It's just like I guess this is technically more efficient. You don't need to push the extra 1 to face, and this also doesn't damage your own board in the scenario. So fine.
Just 2 Devranis.
Yeah.
Make sure that Volptinga has 1 health.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is actually smart too. He's looking at the deck list the same way and knows that as long as he's healing from 1 to 3 every turn, he's not dying. So he might as well just set up the immediate 1-turn lethal. Makes sense.
1 damage that he could have had if he got to swing that bow. Huge.
Yep.
Big deal there. AyRoK taking another loss with his Hunter. Bozzzton going 2-0 up so far in the series. But you did see what Bozzzton had to do to even make that happen, right? That was not, however much the end might have looked like, an easy game for Bozzzton by any means. He had Zephyrus that he had to go early and then replay. He actually didn't use the weapon, but had to get offered like a weird kind of clear with a backstab that turn. And then he got the ooze in perfect time. Otherwise, if that was any later, then AyRoK could have put an extra 6 damage across 2 turns at least, which would have been a huge deal, as you can see. So very close one, but Bozzzton managed to pull it off, which means he only has Druid left.
Yeah, I almost would have liked to have seen that game pan out, because Bozzzton still did keep finding like the Crimson Hothead. He still had clears left over in hand. He still had penance for a little bit of reboost. So whether or not that bow actually gets to connect all that damage to face remains to be seen, but it certainly would have made the conclusion there a little bit more interesting. Obviously, it still looked great on the surface that AyRoK was 1 damage off. But the reality is Bozzzton let him be 1 damage off, because he knew exactly how much damage he could do in that scenario, and it was 0 because he knew the order his deck was in, and he was never drawing a damage card that turn. So Bozzzton chose to ride the line and be aggressive instead and set up the 1-turn lethal, which is absolutely correct to do in that scenario, because you know there's 0 risk of dying that turn when your opponent is drawing a 2-drop guaranteed.
Moving into game number 3, AyRoK has got the opening he wants right now. Outside of a Face Stalker, this is just perfect. Is it going to be? Oh, I wanted that to be Face Stalker so much then. Really strong opening there from AyRoK. Even though Bozzzton has Crystal Power, has Swipe, there's a lot of cards in Bozzdon's deck that make this matchup arguably even worse for him, because he doesn't have as guaranteed a Guardian Animals, and also he isn't playing the Broom, in not even a one-of in the list, like we saw from one of the players earlier on. So if he has to hard cast Beasts from his hand, that's just a losing play, honestly, a lot of the time in this matchup. You just can't, because then the secrets just block Druid out so much, whether it's pressure play or freezing trap specifically.
Little unfortunate that AyRoK's turn 2 lines up so perfectly into Bozzdton's turn 3 here. Bozzzton has really nothing else to be doing here except for Crystal Power, Hero Power. So he has just drawn the Overgrowth. So now he has the potential to Lightning Bloom Overgrowth Crystal Power.
And that also opens up a Swipe as a response to the Felmo, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah, really like the way this curve plays out now. He gets to swipe with 4 mana on his 6 mana turn and then go straight into Guardian Animals, into Geppetto. Oh no, is it happening? 3 absolutely fine matchups for Face Hunter, and AyRoK's just going to lose all of them? It can't happen, right?
Okay, the benefit here for AyRoK is his Voracious Reader, that we can see. His Voracious Reader doesn't die to swipe, right? So he holds something on board. That something is pretty weak, but the worst part is he has double Voracious. Like, oh, it's so bad. Oh. This is not a true representation of how Hunter should play in these matchups, or perform, should I say, not really play, but perform in these matchups. This is very rough here for AyRoK indeed.
You can just see the stress materializing on AyRoK's face, although that might make him feel a little bit better.
But no secrets
Dragonbane
going into 7 mana. Oh, it feels so bad.
But Dragonbane is the draw next turn with the 0 mana hero power already set up, but he uses it now?
I'm a little bit surprised with that one. Is he expecting not to Dragonbane next turn for some reason? Use bow instead, maybe?
He wants
Like
to spend...
Voracious Reader?
Yeah, I mean, he wants to spend 5 mana on 5 and 6 mana on 6, I guess. Like, sure. Yep, certainly the case.
Yeah, I can understand it.
So Bozzzton now knows that the hand will have Dragonbane double kill command in it next turn when he passes back. He doesn't know that the second kill command is there yet, but it will at least be the next draw off the top for AyRoK.
Well, it could be bow, right?
It could be second bow, yeah.
Yeah, it could be
You're
bow
right,
number
you're
2.
right.
Yeah,
Yep, you are
so
correct.
it's not guaranteed it's double kill command, and that's a big deal. The difference between 2 and 1. Oh. It's like twice as bad.
Yo. Alright, counting time, Bozzzton. How safe are you at 19? Because offensive Alex Straza this turn has suddenly just become potentially game-winning.
I think you do it every time, right?
I think so too.
Because he also knows if there was a Phase Stalker in AyRoK's hand, he would have played it by now, I believe. If there was an Ingenuity in AyRoK's hand, he would have played it by now. If there's not, well, there ain't going to be next turn either. So, there's no secrets that are going to mess him up, right? That's the big deal. There's no freezing trap. Huge and good decision making from Bozzzton there. This is just correct.
Yeah, you know that the hand is largely made up of the offensive cards that want to hit you in the face. You know that you are safe because AyRoK just does not have the mana to be able to do everything he needs to do this turn. There's only one card unaccounted for. And as Raven was just explaining the hand reads, you can really rule out just about anything that punches you here. So, punishes you here, sorry. Punches you here? You can rule in everything that punches you.
Yeah, I was going to say, everything punches you.
Yeah, but that's not what you're worried about. So, short version of this very convoluted explanation, you get him. And AyRoK just got.
One of the maybe lesser discussed drawbacks of Polkel is, you know the order, and the order's normally good. Your opponent also knows the order of the deck, and when you're playing in a deck that only really draws off the top and plays off the top, the opponents pretty much know what your plays can be the next following turns. So AyRoK, I think quite rightly, has to just kind of hope it's not there, right? He has no way to deal with this. I think he might have even would have preferred to just see the damage go face.
There's one.
Oh, he's not even going to play the goose.
No, Bozzzton shows it immediately. Does the well-mannered thing of showing the lethal immediately and doing it in the minimum way. I would have slammed Mally in a heartbeat that turn, but AyRoK, heart goes out to him. He is now very much having to deal with all the stress and consternation of relegation and what that means for him, because it's becoming a more and more real prospect with every passing loss. And again, you have to feel sorry for him in that scenario, because each of the matchups he played there individually for Facehunter are fine matchups. So you can't criticize the bring, you can't criticize the triple Q. Maybe we can start to quibble over some of the actual plays, but I think lineup-wise, he's doing fine. He's flying his flag. He's an aggro player and he wants to play aggro. But you can't say, well, you've brought the wrong deck if he's just had 3 good matchups and lost them all. That just doesn't make any sense.
That's it, right? And for me, it's not as if he's